Last summer, I began my job as a lifeguard at a secluded beach resort. It was a beautiful place. The beach was like a scene from a postcard, with its golden sands and waves that glitter in the sun. I've always wanted to be a lifeguard, to watch over the beach and make sure everyone is safe. After passing all my training with top marks, I finally got the chance. On my first morning, I put on my red lifeguard swimsuit, grabbed my whistle, and headed out early. As I walked onto the beach, the cool morning air brushed against my face, and I remember noticing the sound of the waves touching the shore. There were only a few swimmers out so early, some doing laps and others just enjoying the water. I took my position, ready to watch over the swimmers with a focused and vigilant eye. I felt prepared and confident in my ability to manage my duties. My whistle, essential for the job, hung ready around my neck. The scene was calm, and I stood proud at my post, feeling ready for the day ahead. However, as the day progressed, unusual events began to unfold, transforming what I expected to be a straightforward first day into something entirely unexpected. As the morning wore on and more swimmers ventured into the water, I noticed one swimmer going too far from shore. Without hesitation, I blew my whistle sharply to catch his attention and signal him to come closer to the beach. Just as the sound faded, another whistle sounded, exactly like mine, sharp and clear. I paused, scanning the beach and water. No one else on my team was in sight, and the swimmers seemed just as confused, looking around to find the source of the second whistle. I felt concerned as I wondered if I was hearing things. Before I could dwell on it, another strange thing happened. It was midday by then, and the beach was busier. Suddenly, I heard a whistle again, not from me, and saw a group of swimmers change direction, heading towards a part of the sea with rougher waves. I hadn't given any signal, yet they moved as if following an order. My heart raced as I jumped off my lifeguard stand and called out to them, waving them back to safer waters. I managed to gather everyone back to the shore and looked around, trying to spot anyone who could be making the sounds. But there was no one new or suspicious around, just tourists and families, none of whom seemed to have a whistle. These unexplained whistles were not just confusing, but now a real threat to swimmer safety. I felt increasingly uneasy, realizing that whatever was happening was beyond my understanding and potentially very dangerous. As the afternoon approached, the beach seemed calm, but my nerves were on edge from the earlier incidents. Suddenly, I noticed a group of swimmers unknowingly drifting, this time toward a rocky area at the side of the beach. There was no wind or current strong enough to explain their movement. I blew my whistle loudly, signaling them to come back, and shouted directions from my stand, trying to keep the urgency out of my voice to avoid panic. Just as I managed to redirect the swimmers to safety, I heard my whistle sound again, clear and distinct. I turned to see a group of swimmers changing direction, heading straight into a newly forming riptide. My heart sank as I jumped down from my stand and ran along the shore, waving my arms and calling out to them. "Come back! Swim sideways!" I shouted, trying to guide them on how to escape the pull of the riptide. Slowly, they made their way out of the dangerous waters, their faces reflecting the fear I felt inside. But the worst was yet to come. Just as I was catching my breath, relieved that everyone was safe for the moment, I heard something that froze my blood, a child's cry for help, coming from the water. Without a second thought, I grabbed my rescue buoy and plunged into the sea. The cries grew louder as I swam further out, my eyes searching desperately for any sign of a child. But as I reached the area where I thought the cries were the loudest, I found nothing. No child. No sign of anyone in distress. That's when I felt it. A strong pull around my ankle, dragging me down. I struggled, kicking hard, trying to break free from the unseen force. Panic surged through me as I fought against the pull, my mind racing with fear. With one final desperate kick, I managed to free myself and swam back toward the shore with all the strength I had left. As I reached the shallows, my legs gave out, and I collapsed on the sand, breathing hard, my heart pounding in my chest. The cries had stopped, and the beach was quiet again. But I was terrified. Lying on the sand, exhausted and shaken, I tried to gather my thoughts. What was happening? How could this be real? As I lay there, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up to see Mr. Thompson, the beach manager, rushing towards me with a concerned look on his face. "Tyler, are you okay? I heard the whistle and shouts. What happened?" I took a deep breath, still struggling to believe the events myself. "Something's wrong. I heard a child crying for help, but there was no child. And something tried to pull me under," I said, unable to stop my voice from shaking. Mr. Thompson's face turned serious. "We need to get everyone out of the water, now," he decided quickly. He helped me to my feet, and together we blew our whistles continuously, signaling for everyone to leave the water immediately. The other lifeguard joined in, and so did some of the beachgoers, and soon the beach was filled with the sound of whistles and people directing the swimmers to the safety of the shore. Once everyone was out of the water, Mr. Thompson called for emergency services and explained the situation. Within minutes, the Coast Guard arrived to survey the area and ensure there were no hidden currents or other dangers. They patrolled the water, but found nothing unusual. Standing on the shore, watching the professionals handle the situation, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The danger was over, and everyone was safe. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the beach, and the water looked peaceful again. But the fear and confusion of what had happened lingered in my mind, and I could see it on the faces of everyone on the beach as well. Was someone playing a sick joke? Who would do something like that, and why? Could it be something more sinister? I prefer not to think about it. I was relieved that the danger was gone, but I knew the memory of this day would stay with me for a long time. I had just started a new job as a mail carrier. The co-worker who showed me around in the morning assured me that the work was mostly quiet and told me that I would be doing the same thing every day, just driving through long stretches of road lined with trees and old fences. It sounded peaceful, and I liked the calm. After a couple of hours out on my own making deliveries, I totally got what my co-worker meant. But there was one part of my route that was different from the rest. At the very end of my delivery list, there was this old house that I was supposed to go to. It wasn't like the other stops. This house was old and falling apart, sitting alone at the end of a long, winding gravel road. The funny thing was, this house didn't show up in the official digital logs that my boss gave me, but it was on my GPS and my printed list of places to deliver mail. That afternoon, the sky was filled with gray clouds, making everything look a bit gloomy. As I turned onto the gravel road, curiosity mixed with a bit of duty pushed me forward. I remember thinking, why is this house even on my route? But there I was, driving slowly towards the last stop, the tires of my delivery van crunching on the gravel as I approached the creepy old house at the end of the line. As I got closer to the house, I noticed the mailbox was not right next to the front door like you'd expect. It was a bit away, almost hidden by tall, wild weeds that looked like they hadn't been cut in ages. I walked over to it and pulled out the bundle of mail for this strange place. The mailbox squeaked loudly as I opened it, and just as I was sliding the letters in, it snapped shut so fast it almost smashed my fingers. I jumped back, heart racing a bit, wondering if the wind could have done that. But there wasn't much of a breeze. Taking a deep breath, I shook off the weird feeling and walked up to the front door. I rang the bell and waited. After a short moment, the door opened slowly, and there stood an elderly woman. She seemed normal enough at first, but there was something a bit off about her. She wouldn't step outside, and she insisted, almost too eagerly, that I come in to hand her the mail directly. Her eyes kept flicking nervously to the windows covered with heavy curtains, as if she was scared someone might be watching. It made me uneasy, but I thought maybe she was just being cautious, living all alone out here. "Please, just come in for a moment, young man," she urged, her voice trembling a bit. Not wanting to be rude, I stepped inside, and that's when I heard it. A faint whispering sound coming from the back of the house. It was so soft, I wasn't even sure I heard it right. "Is someone else here?" I asked. looking around the dim hallway that seemed too quiet. "No, just us," she replied quickly, a bit too quickly. But I could have sworn that whispering was real, even though she insisted we were alone. I tried to stay calm, even though everything inside me was saying this was a weird situation. The woman had vanished down a hallway, leaving me standing alone in the entrance. That's when I decided to leave, but when I turned back to the door, I found it wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, thinking it was just stuck, but it felt like it was locked from the outside. My heart started beating faster. "This can't be happening," I thought. I called out to the woman, but she didn't answer. It was completely silent now. No more whispers, just my own breath sounding loud in my ears. Deciding to find another way out, I walked through the house. The further I went, the older everything looked. It was like stepping back in time. In one room, filled with dusty old books and furniture covered in sheets, an ancient radio suddenly crackled to life. It was loud and filled the room with a scratchy old news report from what sounded like World War II. The room had no other modern technology, not even a light bulb that worked, so the radio turning on by itself really freaked me out. I left that room quickly, heading for what I hoped would be a back door, but as I hurried, the floor beneath me groaned and creaked. Just as I reached the kitchen, the wood gave way under one foot, and I nearly fell through. Catching myself on the edge, I managed to pull my leg back up. The hole looked deep, and I couldn't see the bottom. It made me realize this house could fall apart any minute, and if I didn't get out soon, I might not get out at all. I finally made it to what looked like a study. The door slammed shut behind me as soon as I entered. Before I could even think to open it, thick, dark smoke began pouring out from the fireplace. It filled the room so quickly that I started coughing and couldn't see a thing. I dropped to the ground trying to breathe and find my way to a window. Crawling, feeling along the wall, I found the window. It was stuck, but with all my strength and fear giving me a rush, I managed to force it open. I clambered out, tumbling onto the ground outside, taking in deep breaths of fresh air. Looking back at the house through the window I just escaped from, I saw smoke billowing out. I didn't stop to look for long, though. I ran to my van, started it up, and drove away from that creepy house as fast as I could. I didn't look back, not even once. When I finally got home that day, my hands were still shaking a bit from everything that happened. I kept going over it in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. It felt so real, yet it was hard to believe a place like that could even exist. The next morning, I told my supervisor about the house and what had happened. He looked through the records, confused. According to the old property files, no one had lived at that address for over 50 years. He said it must have been a mistake, a glitch in the system that put the house on my delivery list. But glitches don't lock doors or create smoke. I couldn't just let it go. I spent the next few days doing some digging of my own. I went to the local library and looked up old newspaper articles trying to find out who last owned the house. All I found was a faded photo of the house from a long time ago, and a story about the original owner, a recluse who had vanished without a trace many years before. The house was abandoned. With more questions than answers, I went back to my supervisor and asked if I could maybe go back there, just to see it one more time, to prove to myself I wasn't crazy. He didn't think it was a good idea. Instead, he quietly changed my route. I was relieved, honestly, but also a bit frustrated. No more long gravel road, no more eerie house at the end. Days turned into weeks, and while I was glad to be rid of that last delivery stop, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was the woman? Why did the house seem to live in a different time? And what was with all those strange happenings? It was a mystery that seemed like it didn't want to be solved, and maybe some things are better left that way. It was a few months ago. I was on my first shift as a security guard at a large hospital. I remember being both nervous and excited. It was not my first tough job. I used to be in the military. As a woman, this forced me to find my inner strength and become truly brave. But walking into the hospital's abandoned ward, I could feel that this job was going to be different. This place was set to be torn down soon, but for now, it was my responsibility to keep it secure. The ward was at the very edge of the hospital grounds, far from the lively, busy parts where doctors and nurses rushed around saving lives. Here, it was silent except for the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the halls. The only light came from my flashlight, casting long shadows that flicked and twisted around every corner. The place was filled with old, rusting beds and machines that hadn't been used in years. As I walked down the dark, narrow hallways, I had an eerie sense that I wasn't completely alone. Little did I know, my first night on the job was about to become a true test of my courage. As I continued my patrol through the abandoned ward, I noticed something strange. The old medical monitors and surgical lights started flickering on and off. This was odd because I was told all the power had been cut off to this part of the hospital. Immediately, I became on high alert, and I pointed my flashlight at the flickering lights. Why were they still working? The air felt heavy as I moved deeper into the ward. Then I started hearing voices. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the soft voices got louder. There were quiet conversations coming from down the hall. I followed the sounds with my flashlight leading the way. The whispers took me to a couple of rooms that were supposed to be locked and empty. When I looked inside, I saw signs that people had been there recently. There were fresh cigarette butts on the floor and food wrappers lying around. I knew something wasn't right. Then I found a hidden door that looked out of place. It was partially open, and as I pushed it wider, a cold draft hit me. Inside, the room was set up like a makeshift lab with tables full of chemical equipment and several large barrels of chemicals. It was clear now, someone was using this abandoned ward to make drugs. All my training kicked in at once. I realized I had stumbled onto something illegal and dangerous, and that I was going to need to stay calm and be very careful from here on out. While I was closely examining the equipment in the drug synthesis room, my hand slipped and knocked over a metal tool. The loud clang echoed through the empty halls. I heard shouts and the sounds of people scrambling nearby. Quickly, I switched off my radio to keep the guys from locating me by any noise it might make. Then, I ducked behind a large, rusted filing cabinet, holding my breath as I heard footsteps and voices coming closer. Several guys entered the room, each holding something that looked like a weapon. I peeked through a gap in the cabinet and saw them looking around, their faces stern and alert. They were definitely armed and looked dangerous. I stayed completely still, barely daring to breathe as they searched the room. After a very long 10 minutes, they moved on, and I let out a quiet sigh of relief. I knew I needed to move, so I carefully made my way to an old patient ward to hide. As I crept through the shadows, the floor creaked under my step. Suddenly, a flashlight beam swept into the room. I dove under an old hospital bed just in time, pulling my legs in tight. The light hovered near me, and I could hear one of the guy's footsteps approaching. He paused right beside the bed, and I held my breath, expecting him to look under at any moment. After a tense moment, he walked away, and I waited until the coast was clear before crawling out. I needed to alert the main hospital for help. I dashed toward the stairwell, but as I reached the door, I heard shouting behind me. I'd been spotted. Running up the stairs, I heard the footsteps of one of the guys close behind. Relying on my military training, I turned at the landing, ready to defend myself. We clashed, grappling in the narrow stairwell. Using my elbow, I managed to strike him in the ribs, giving me just enough time to break free and continue up the stairs. Reaching the top, I found myself at a dead-end hallway. I could hear them coming after me. Desperate, I remembered the layout of the ward from training and ran towards a fire alarm on the wall. I smashed the glass and pulled the lever down hard. The loud ringing disoriented them, and their shouts turned confused. Seizing the moment, I slipped through a maintenance door they had missed and made my way through a narrow service corridor, finally out of their immediate reach. Once I slipped through the maintenance door, I hurried down to the ground floor, checking behind me to make sure no one was following. Feeling secure, I turned my walkie-talkie back on and quickly contacted the off-site hospital security to report everything that was happening in the abandoned ward, the guys, the drug lab, and their pursuit of me. Hospital security responded immediately, confirming help was on the way. As I waited, the sound of sirens grew louder, a reassuring sign that the police were arriving. I didn't stay hidden. Instead, I went to meet the arriving security team to provide them with details in person. I joined the security officers as they coordinated with the police, guiding them through the ward's layout and leading them to the key areas where I had encountered the guys. The police moved swiftly through the hallways, apprehending the guys as they tried to get away. I watched with a strong sense of satisfaction as each one was handcuffed. The relief of the danger passing was real, but I felt a sense of pride rather than exhaustion. I walked with the officers, who thanked me for my bravery and effective response. The adrenaline was still there, but it was now mixed with a feeling of accomplishment. My first night on the job had turned out to be intense and unexpected, but I had managed to rise to the challenge, actively helping to keep the hospital safe.